Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm 23 years old. If you met me today, you would probably see an ordinary young woman walking across a college campus in the United States, books in my arms, headphones in my ears, and a quiet determination on my face. But what you wouldn't see is the world I carry inside me, the journey that shaped me long before I understood what strength really means. I grew up believing that love was something you earned, something you had to fight for, something that depended on how perfect you could be. Maybe that's why I tried so hard to keep everyone happy, my parents, my friends, even strangers who never knew my name. My life at 23 felt like a mix of dreams and exhaustion. I was finishing my senior year in college, juggling long nights of assignments, part-time work, and the pressure of planning a life after graduation. Some days, I felt like I had everything under control, and on other days, even breathing felt like work. College wasn't glamorous for me. I didn't come from money, like many others around me. My parents, Karen and Richard, believed strongly in status, reputation, and how the world looked at them. They raised me with strict expectations: be perfect, be polite, be quiet. But even with all the pressure, I loved being at college. It gave me space to breathe, to exist in a world where I didn't have to meet anyone's impossible standards. I could sit under old maple trees, sip cheap coffee, and imagine who I could become if I were free to choose my own life. There was something comforting about blending into the background, not being the center of judgmental eyes. Here, I felt like I could finally be me. Still, a part of me always longed for connection, for someone who would see me beyond the surface, someone who would understand the loneliness I carried quietly. I didn't know that soon, very soon, I would meet someone who would change everything. Someone who would make me believe that maybe, just maybe, love could be gentle. At that time, I had no idea that my life was about to shift in ways I could never imagine. I didn't know that I was standing at the very edge of a storm, one that would break me, remake me, and eventually teach me the one truth I had spent my whole life searching for. I still remember the exact moment I first saw Daniel. It was one of those cold winter mornings when the sky looked half asleep and everyone moved a little slower than usual. I was sitting in the campus library, surrounded by half-written notes and empty coffee cups, trying to force my brain to focus on an upcoming exam. My fingers were freezing, my mind was foggy, and I was silently praying for the semester to end. That's when Daniel walked in. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, like he belonged to the calmness of that space. He took a seat across from me, and for a moment I didn't think much of it. But then he looked up in my direction and gave the smallest, warmest smile I had ever seen. It was the kind of smile that didn't demand attention but somehow captured it anyway. He noticed the frustration on my face and gently whispered, "Long day." I don't know why, but I found myself nodding before I could think. He chuckled softly. "Same here." That tiny exchange opened a door I didn't even know existed. We talked for a few minutes about classes, professors, our majors, and something in me felt lighter. There was something genuine about him, an ease in his presence that felt rare. Over the next few days, I saw him again in the library, then in the hallway, and eventually at the little cafe near campus, where I usually hid with my laptop. Each time, the conversations got longer, warmer, and somehow more meaningful. He wasn't like the people I grew up around. He didn't care about brands, money, or impressing anyone. He asked real questions about my dreams, my fears, my childhood, and what made me happy. And he actually listened. I wasn't used to that. Slowly, the small moments multiplied. He would walk me to class when it snowed. He would bring me hot chocolate when I looked stressed. We'd sit under the big oak tree near the student center, laughing about things that never mattered but somehow meant everything at the time. One evening, while walking back to my dorm, he gently took my hand. It felt natural, like our fingers were meant to find each other. I remember my heart beating fast, warmth rising in my chest. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen, truly chosen. Eventually, Daniel told me he cared about me, more than just casually, and I knew I felt the same. It wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was quiet, steady, and beautiful. The kind of love that sneaks up on you and suddenly feels like home. I didn't know then that love can also become the very reason you lose yourself. As winter break approached, the campus slowly began to empty. Students packed their cars, dragging suitcases across parking lots, excited to go home to warmth, family, and oversized Christmas dinners. I watched the cheerful chaos around me and felt a mixture of emotions: hope, nerves, and a quiet fear I couldn't name. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just going home for Christmas. I was taking someone with me. Someone who meant something to me. Someone I hoped my parents would accept. Daniel and I had been together for a few months by then, and everything between us felt steady and gentle. He had become my comfort in a world that often felt overwhelming. I found myself imagining what it would be like if my parents liked him, if they could look past their obsession with money and reputation and simply see him for the kind, sincere man he was. One cold evening, while we walked through the campus quad decorated with Christmas lights, I finally told him my plan. "I want you to meet my parents," I said quietly, almost afraid of his reaction. He looked surprised at first, then a soft smile spread across his face. "Really? Are you sure?" I nodded.
Yes.
"I want them to know the person who makes me happy." Daniel hesitated slightly, just enough for me to notice. "Are they strict?" he asked gently. I forced a small laugh. Strict is an understatement. Judgmental might be a better word.
He squeezed my hand.
"Well, I'm not exactly perfect, but I'll try my best." The next few days were filled with preparations, emotional, mental, and practical. I helped Daniel choose a simple, neat winter outfit. He kept asking things like, "Should I bring a gift? Do they like wine? Will they ask about my family?" His sincerity tugged at my heart, but deep inside, an uneasiness kept growing. I knew my parents. I knew the coldness behind their polished smiles and how quickly they judged anyone outside their wealthy circle. Still, I convinced myself that love could soften even the hardest walls. On the morning we were supposed to leave, Daniel showed up outside my dorm with a small wrapped box in his hand. "For your mom," he said nervously. "Just a little something." I smiled, touched and terrified. I kept telling myself my parents would see what I saw. A good man, a kind heart, someone worth welcoming. But as we drove toward my hometown, watching snow-covered roads stretch endlessly in front of us, I felt a heaviness in my chest. A quiet whisper telling me that not every story begins with acceptance. Some begin with a test. Some begin with a storm. And I was about to walk right into mine. The moment we stepped onto my parents' driveway, I felt my stomach tighten. Their house looked like something pulled straight from a Christmas magazine. Warm golden lights wrapped around the porch railings, a huge wreath hanging on the door, and soft piano music drifting from inside. Anyone else would have called it perfect. I knew better. Beauty was the part my parents worked hardest on. The rest, the warmth, the kindness, the softness, was always missing. Daniel looked around, impressed but uneasy. "Your parents really go all out for Christmas," he whispered. I forced a small smile. "Yeah, it's kind of their thing." Before I could knock, the door opened. My mother, Karen, stood there in a deep red dress, her expression frozen into a smile that felt more like a test than a welcome. "You're finally here," she said, her eyes drifting to Daniel with thinly veiled surprise. "And you brought company." Her tone stung, but I pretended not to notice. "Mom, this is Daniel." Daniel stepped forward politely. "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Collins." She didn't shake his hand. She just nodded and stepped aside. Not a good start. Inside, the dining table shimmered with candles, crystal glasses, and expensive dishes meant more for show than for guests. My father, Richard, stood near the fireplace, swirling wine in a tall glass, pretending not to see us until my mother cleared her throat. He turned, and the look he gave Daniel made my heart drop. Cold, assessing, dismissive. "This is him," he said bluntly. I felt Daniel tense beside me. "Yes," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, this is Daniel, my boyfriend." The room fell strangely quiet. Even the relatives who'd come, my aunt, my cousins, watched us with a kind of curiosity people usually reserve for scandals. Dinner began awkwardly. Every time Daniel tried to speak, my parents cut him off or responded with lukewarm politeness. They asked about his family, his major, his plans. Daniel answered honestly each time, but I could feel the weight of every judgment in the air. At one point, my father leaned back in his chair and asked, "So, Daniel, what do your parents do? I assume they're successful?" Daniel swallowed hard. "My mom works in a local clinic. My dad passed away when I was a kid." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, but my father didn't soften. "I see. And financially? You manage on your own, I assume?" "Dad," I hissed softly. "Stop." But he didn't stop. "Sarah, I have a right to know the background of the man you're bringing into this family." Daniel cleared his throat gently. "I work part-time at a bookstore while finishing my degree. I'm paying my own tuition." My mother raised an eyebrow.
Oh,
"That must be difficult." Her voice sliced the air like a knife. And then I made the mistake of saying it. "I love him." The entire table froze. My father set his glass down with a loud clink. "Excuse me? I love him," I repeated, louder this time. "And I want to marry him." My father stared at me for a long moment before turning to Daniel. "If you want to marry my daughter," he said slowly, "you will need to prove you can take care of her. Bring me $100,000. Daniel's face drained of color. I don't have that kind of money," he whispered. "But I love Sarah. I plan to build a future with her." My mother shook her head. "Love doesn't pay bills." I felt something inside me crack. "Mom, Dad, stop. You don't even know him." Richard slammed a hand on the table. "We don't need to know him. He is not your level, Sarah." Daniel reached for my hand under the table. His fingers trembled. And in that moment I knew this night wasn't about Christmas. It was about control, about power, about everything my parents believed mattered more than love. I just didn't know the worst was still coming. I wish I could say things calmed down after that, but the air only grew heavier, so heavy I felt like each breath scraped against my ribs. Daniel's hand was still trembling in mine under the table, and I squeezed it gently, silently telling him I was with him. But my father wasn't finished, not even close. "Well," my father demanded, leaning forward, "are you going to meet our condition or not?" Daniel swallowed hard and shook his head. "Sir, I can't bring that kind of money. I'm still studying. I work part-time. But I love your daughter. I want to build a life with her. Honestly, respectfully." My father scoffed. "Love? That's all you have to offer?" My mother crossed her arms, letting out a harsh sigh. "Sarah, seriously, look at him. Does he look like someone who can give you the life you deserve?" I felt my heart burn. "Mom, Dad, you're being unfair. Money isn't everything. He's kind, he's decent." Richard stood abruptly, pointing a finger at Daniel. "You will never marry my daughter. Not unless you prove you can afford her. And clearly you cannot." Daniel lowered his eyes, hurt but dignified. "I'm sorry you feel that way," he said softly. "But I love Sarah, and that should matter." My father's face turned red, anger pulsing through every vein. "Don't you tell me what should matter in my house." He stepped closer, towering over Daniel. I stood up quickly, trying to place myself between them. "Dad, stop. Please." But it was too late. In one swift, violent moment, my father raised his hand and struck Daniel across the face, so hard that the sound echoed through the room like something breaking. Daniel stumbled back, shock and humiliation written all over him. My breath caught in my throat. Time froze around me. I felt my body shake, not from fear, but from something deeper, something ripping open inside me. "Dad!" I screamed, stepping forward. "What is wrong with you?" My mother didn't move. My relatives looked away, pretending not to see the cruelty happening right in front of them. Daniel touched his cheek, his eyes wet. Not with tears, but with a kind of pain that doesn't find words. He whispered, "Sarah, let's go." And that was it. That was the moment something inside me snapped for good. I looked at my parents, really looked at them and saw not protectors, not family, but people who cared more about wealth, ego, and reputation than their own daughter's heart. Without another word, I reached for Daniel's hand. "We're leaving," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. My father barked, "If you walk out that door, don't come back." I turned to him, my eyes burning, but my voice calm. I wasn't planning to. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the freezing night, snowflakes hitting my skin like tiny sparks of truth. Daniel walked beside me, silent, broken, but holding my hand like it was the only thing keeping him standing. As the warm glow of my parents' perfect house faded behind us, I finally understood something. I never belonged there, not really. And though I didn't know it yet, walking out of that door was the beginning of a journey that would change everything. The morning after we left my parents' house, everything felt strangely quiet, too quiet. Daniel and I sat on a bench outside his small apartment building, wrapped in our coats, watching our breaths turn into pale clouds in the cold air. Neither of us said much. Both of us were still replaying the night before in our minds like a bruise we couldn't stop pressing. At one point, Daniel finally turned toward me and asked softly, "Do you regret leaving with me?" The question cut through me. I shook my head instantly.
No.
"I don't regret choosing you. Not for a second." Something in his eyes softened, like he needed that reassurance more than I knew. And in that moment, surrounded by winter silence, he whispered, "Marry me." There was no dramatic proposal, no ring, no perfect moment, just two people clinging to each other in the middle of their hurt. I felt my chest tighten, and I nodded.
Yes.
"I'll marry you." We both knew we couldn't wait. Maybe it was fear of losing each other, maybe desperation for a new beginning, or maybe just the need to build something the world couldn't break. So that same afternoon, we drove to the downtown courthouse. The building was plain, quiet, nothing like the wedding I once imagined, but somehow it felt right. There were no guests, no decorations, just a clerk who barely looked up from her paperwork and a judge who spoke so fast I barely absorbed the words. But when Daniel took my hands in his and looked into my eyes, for a brief moment, everything felt safe. Like love could protect us from the broken pieces trailing behind. "I promise I'll make you happy," he whispered. And I believed him. We signed the papers, exchanged simple vows, and walked out as husband and wife. I remember smiling as we stepped into the cold air, imagining a future where we'd prove everyone wrong, especially my parents. For a few days, everything felt soft again. We cooked together, watched movies on his old couch, and talked about finding a better apartment after graduation. Daniel would gently kiss my forehead and say, "We'll build our own life, just you and me." But slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first, things began to shift. He grew quieter, more distant. Sometimes I'd catch him staring off into space, jaw tight, fingers tapping restlessly against the table. Other times, he'd snap over small things. Keys misplaced, dinner not ready, the apartment looking messy after a long day. His voice would harden, sharp and impatient. One evening, when I tried to comfort him, he pulled his hand away and muttered, "Maybe if your parents hadn't treated me like trash, none of this would be happening." I froze. "Daniel, it wasn't your fault." He didn't answer. The first cracks were small, but I felt them. A heaviness began filling the air between us, something unspoken but undeniable. I told myself it was stress. I told myself love could fix it. I told myself marriage just had rough beginnings. But deep inside, a quiet fear whispered, "This isn't the man you married." And I didn't know yet that the darkest part of our story hadn't even begun. The shift in Daniel wasn't sudden. It was slow, creeping, almost invisible at first, like the way winter darkness grows earlier each day until suddenly you realize you haven't seen the sun in weeks. It began with small things. A sharp tone here, an irritated sigh there, a cold silence that lingered longer than before. I kept telling myself he was stressed, that what happened at my parents' house had wounded him deeply. But soon, the cracks turned into fractures. One night, about a month into our marriage, I accidentally burned dinner. It wasn't much, just the edges of the chicken too dark, But Daniel's reaction made my heart twist. "For God's sake, Sarah," he yelled, slamming the pan onto the counter. "Can't you do anything right?" I stood frozen. "It's just dinner," I whispered. He glared at me, eyes full of something I couldn't recognize anymore. "It's not about dinner. It's about everything. Your parents humiliated me. They treated me like garbage. And now everything is falling apart because of that." The words hit me like a slap. "Daniel, please." "I'm trying." He shook his head, breathing heavily. "Trying isn't enough. They owe me more than an apology. They owe me respect." He walked into the bedroom and slammed the door, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with a burnt meal and a sinking feeling in my chest. Over the next days, Daniel's anger only grew sharper. He would accuse me of not understanding him, of not supporting him enough, of choosing my parents over him, even though I had walked away from everything for him. His words cut deeper than any physical wound. "You're just like them," he would whisper in frustration. "You think you're better than me." And the worst part was, I started believing him. I stopped talking to my friends. I stopped writing in my journal. I tiptoed around our apartment, terrified of doing something wrong. I kept telling myself this was my fault. If I hadn't introduced him that night, if I had defended him more, if I had protected him better, maybe he wouldn't be hurting like this. Then one night, everything escalated. We were sitting on the couch when Daniel suddenly turned to me with a cold seriousness that made my skin prickle. "I want you to go to your parents' house," he said. My heart dropped. "Why?" He leaned in closer. "Because they need to apologize to me.
Publicly.
I want them to say they were wrong. I want them to say I'm worthy of you." I stared at him, stunned. "Daniel, they'll never do that." He clenched his jaw. "Then fix it." "What do you mean fix it?" He stood up suddenly and shouted. "I mean you go there and tell them. Make them understand. Make them admit they were wrong." I flinched at his voice. "Daniel, please, they won't listen to me. They never have." His face twisted with fury I had never seen before. "Then why should I stay with you? If you can't stand up for me, why am I even here?" A deep silence followed, heavy and suffocating. He took a step back, breathing hard. "You want this marriage to survive, Sarah? Then you'll go to them. Tomorrow." I felt the floor disappear beneath me. My heart was racing, but I nodded slowly, tears burning the corners of my eyes. "Okay,
I'll go."
Daniel said nothing more. He turned off the lights and went to bed, leaving me trembling in the dark, wondering how love had transformed into fear so quickly, and how much more of myself I would lose before I finally broke. I barely slept that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Daniel's steady breathing beside me, wondering when our marriage had turned into something I didn't recognize. When morning finally came, my chest felt heavy, as if someone had placed a weight on it overnight. I moved quietly, afraid that even a small sound might trigger another argument. Daniel watched me from the doorway as I put on my coat. His expression was cold, unreadable. "You know what you need to do," he said. I swallowed hard and nodded. "I'll go now." The drive to my parents' house felt longer than it ever had. Snow covered the sidewalks, and the sky hung low and gray, as if mirroring the dread inside me. When I finally stood at their front door, my hands were shaking so badly I had to take a deep breath before knocking. My mother opened the door with a look that wasn't surprise, just annoyance.
"Oh."
"It's you." I forced a weak smile. "Can I come in?" She hesitated but stepped aside. The house looked exactly the same as the night I'd left, perfectly decorated, perfectly cold. My father sat at the dining table reading the newspaper. He didn't even bother to look up.
"Dad."
I whispered. He turned a page, ignoring me. I stood there, feeling like a child again, unwanted, invisible. Tears stung my eyes, but I swallowed them down. I came to talk," I said, my voice trembling. "About what?" My mother replied, arms crossed. "About Daniel," I managed. My father finally set the newspaper down and glared at me. "What about him? You made your choice. You left with him. That has nothing to do with us anymore." I felt my throat tighten. He wants you both to apologize for how you treated him. My mother laughed, a cold, sharp laugh that sliced right through me. Apologize? To him? For what? For humiliating him. For hitting him, Dad. My father stood up slowly, his face hardening. I should have hit him harder, he said. Maybe then he'd know his place. The words punched the air out of my lungs. Dad, please, I whispered. My marriage is falling apart. I need your help. Just please apologize, so he stops blaming me. My mother shook her head. We don't owe him anything, Sarah. And if your marriage is broken, that's on you, not us. A tear rolled down my cheek before I could stop it. I walked out for him. I said quietly, I chose him over you, and you still don't care? My father looked at me with a coldness that made my insides burn. You chose wrong. Now live with it. I stood there for a long moment, feeling something inside me shatter, something I had been holding together for years without realizing it. I finally understood that my parents were never going to be the people I hoped they were. Without another word, I turned and walked out. I didn't look back. When I reached home, I felt drained, empty. Daniel was sitting on the couch, waiting. They said no, I whispered. His jaw tightened. Of course they did. They never respected me. I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off. And now I know why. You're just like them. The words stabbed deeper than anything my parents had ever said. Daniel, that's not fair. He stood up abruptly. I'm done, Sarah. If your own parents won't apologize for what they did, then I'm not staying in this marriage. My breath caught. Daniel, please. Don't do this. We can fix it. No, he said, cold and final. I'm leaving. I felt myself crumble. What about us? What about everything we went through?
He shook his head.
It's over. Then he picked up his bag, opened the door, and walked out without looking back, leaving me alone in the silence of our small apartment, abandoned by the two people I loved most in the world. And for the first time, I truly felt the meaning of loneliness. The days after Daniel left were a blur, an endless stretch of hours that all blended into the same dull ache. I didn't even remember how long I sat on the living room floor after the door closed behind him. It felt like something inside me had collapsed, like my chest had caved in, leaving only emptiness behind. I had walked away from my parents for him, and now he had walked away from me without a glance back. For the first time in my life, I had no home to return to, no mother to cry to, no father to protect me, no partner waiting for me. I was completely, painfully alone. The next morning, I forced myself to stand. My legs trembled, as if they had forgotten how to hold me up. I looked around the apartment, silent, cold, stripped of the warmth that once existed when Daniel and I believed in a future. His toothbrush was gone. His jacket missing from the hook. His mug no longer sitting beside mine by the sink. Each absence felt like a new wound. I stopped eating. Food tasted like nothing. I stopped sleeping. Nights stretched endlessly while my mind replayed every mistake, every argument, every moment I could have fixed. I stopped going to work. Even getting dressed felt impossible. My phone buzzed for days, Emily calling, my coworker checking in, but I ignored it all. The world felt distant, muffled, like I was underwater, and everything above the surface had become unreachable. Simple things became impossibly heavy. Washing dishes felt like climbing a mountain. Taking a shower felt like lifting a weight I didn't have strength for. Even breathing sometimes felt like a choice. One evening, after nearly a week of isolation, I collapsed in the middle of the kitchen. My body shook uncontrollably, not from cold, but from a wave of panic so strong I couldn't breathe. My hands tingled, my heart raced, and it felt like I might disappear right there on the floor. A neighbor, hearing the noise, knocked on my door. When I didn't answer, she used the spare key Daniel once gave her in case of emergencies. She found me curled on the tiles, sobbing and gasping for air. She called an ambulance. At the hospital, a nurse gently explained what had happened. You had a severe panic attack, she said. You're emotionally exhausted. You need help, sweetheart. Real help. A doctor later came in and spoke to me calmly. You've been through trauma, he said kindly. I'm referring you to a therapist. You don't have to do this alone. The next week, I met Dr. Morgan for the first time. She had warm eyes and a soft voice that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in months. The first session, I barely spoke. I cried more than I talked. But she didn't rush me.
She didn't judge me.
She simply listened. You've been carrying pain for a long time, she said gently. Let's start putting it down piece by piece. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt a tiny spark of something. Not hope exactly, but the possibility of it. Choosing therapy didn't magically fix my life, but it was the first step towards something I thought I had lost forever. Myself. Healing didn't come as quickly as I hoped. It didn't arrive in a single moment or through a single conversation. It came slowly, quietly, like the first light of morning sneaking in through a cracked curtain. Some days I felt strong enough to get out of bed and face the world, and other days I stayed under the blankets, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had fallen apart so fast. But through every up and down, Dr. Morgan stayed patient with me. She never pushed me. She guided me gently, helping me unravel the knots I had kept buried inside me for years. One session at a time, I learned to name the things I had always been too afraid to say. That my parents never made me feel enough. That Daniel's love had felt like safety until it turned into a cage. That losing them both had nearly destroyed me. But I also learned something even more important. That my worth was not dependent on who stayed or who left. It was mine. Always had been. As the weeks turned into months, I began rebuilding my life in small, deliberate ways. I found a tiny one-bedroom apartment with warm sunlight that filled the windows in the morning. Mrs. Green, my landlord, always greeted me with a smile, sometimes leaving baked cookies at my door just because. Jenna, at work, helped me transition back into my job, never asking questions, just offering kindness when I needed it most. Slowly, I learned to enjoy little things again, making my own breakfast, tidying my space, watering the small plant Dr. Morgan encouraged me to buy, walking to work with a warm cup of coffee in my hands. I started journaling again. I began cooking new recipes, playing soft music in the evenings, and decorating my apartment with things that reflected me, not my parents' taste, not Daniel's preferences, just me. One afternoon, as I stood in my tiny kitchen stirring a pot of soup, I realized something that made my chest tighten, not in pain, but in a surprising kind of peace. I wasn't lonely anymore. I was alone, yes, but alone wasn't empty. Alone was mine. Alone was safe. Alone was finally peaceful. By the time the next Christmas rolled around, I felt like a different woman. Not fixed, not perfect, but whole in a way I had never been before. I decorated my apartment with a small tree, lit a single candle, and wrapped myself in a warm blanket as soft music played. No parents calling. No husband shouting. No expectations crushing me. Just me, Sarah, breathing freely in a life I had built with my own two hands. That night, as snow began to fall outside my window, I whispered words I once never believed I would say. I broke into pieces, but I rebuilt myself. And now, I will never hand my life over to anyone again. If this story touched your heart, please show your support by liking the video, sharing your thoughts in the comments, and subscribing to the channel for more powerful real-life stories. Your engagement means the world and helps us bring you new stories every day. Thank you for watching.